Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's talk, Design, Detail and Aesthetics. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the last talk as part of Global Design Forum, a dynamic programme of live events and digital talks that took place throughout the London Design Festival. I'm Margaret Cubbage, the curator of this year's forum, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to this talk today, which is kindly sponsored by No. 3 Gin. We have a great team of distinct creatives, a pool of talent right here on the stage, and I'm going to hand you over to Ben Hobson from Dezeen, who's going to introduce the talk for today's session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. I was just saying to Seb, it's so nice to be in front of real, actual people with flesh and bones on. So, yeah, it's really good to be here. For all the non-real people, we're also streaming this live on Dezeen via YouTube, Facebook. For those that can't be with us in person, we hope you enjoy the talk as well. As Margaret said, the title of the talk is Design, Detail and Aesthetics. And our panelists today will be talking about their work, the concept of kind of perfection in design, and I suppose also how in different ways they each, through their work, kind of uncover beauty in maybe unexpected places. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Sebastian Cox, Bethan Laura Wood, and Justin Zoll. Before you guys take us through your work, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? How do you do it? Seb?
Yeah, so you mean without the slides?
Without the slides, just a very brief, okay. Yeah.
So my name's Sebastian Cox. I'm a furniture designer and maker based in London. I also consider myself an environmentalist, and pretty much everything we do as a studio is focused around trying to provoke environmental change and make products which are regenerative.
Great, thank you. Bethan?
Hello, I'm Bethan Laura Wood, and I class myself as a mixed discipline designer, so I make multiple different things from tableware to larger sculptures to textiles, and I tend to like a lot of colour and pattern in my work, and I'm based in London.
Great, and Justin?
Hi, my name is Justin Zoll. I'm based in a little town called Ithaca in the center of New York State. I'm a photographer and have been a bartender for about 10 years now. And most recently, my work is focused around photography through the microscope.
So you're a photographer and bartender, so this is like the perfect collaboration for you with No. 3 Gin.
I think I was a good find for the right thing, yeah.
Great. Perfect. All right, well, let's dive into the presentation. Seb, I think you're up first. Do you want to grab the clicker and take us through your work?
Okay, cool. I start with an image of our woodland. So we're furniture makers, but I guess the thing that makes us different from many furniture makers is that we are also foresters. So we have a small woodland, and this is gives us a sort of proxy understanding of sustainable methods of forestry, woodland management, and actually the benefits of biodiversity when you do manage woodland correctly. So this is an aerial shot. I think this one's from spring this year. We photograph it every season. This is before the leaves came out. And we practice in this wood, we practice an ancient process of woodland management called coppicing. And some of the pieces that you'll see in a minute are made with the material from here. And for us, the reason I start with this is because we like to think about how the resources that nature can give us can yield us the materials to make our material culture with. So we sort of invert that relationship of saying, I want to design a dining table and I want it in American black walnut. We'll invert that and say, what wood does our forest yield and what can we design with that? So design and aesthetics are tools through which we can use more sustainable materials. This is our workshop in Southeast London. We're based in Woolwich. There's about 15 of us in there. This was a very tidy day, actually. We've got a really nice workshop with skilled craftsmen. We have apprentices, we're really focused around how not just the materials can yield kind of design ideas, but also how craft and making can kind of unlock different ways of working with material. And hopefully some of the images that I put in here will will show that. I actually don't really remember what I put in here. Oh yeah, we also have a sawmill, which is part of the thing that bridges the forest with the workshop. We've got various sawmills. We've got big chainsaw ones that can do massive trees, and then we've got this band mill which can do smaller trees. We work with, like I say, material from our own wood, but we also work with street trees from around London. Very often we get commissioned by clients who have kind of, you know, large houses and gardens with their own trees to turn their material into furniture for their house, which is really nice. So yeah, we're portable, and we can get in all the awkward places and find uses for those trees which would otherwise be chipped. So currently this is where we're showing for the Design Festival. This is Cavendish Square, not a million miles from here, just north of Oxford Circus. And we're showing in a thing called Design House. And we've got a room set in there of our various collections. This is our bay leaf collection from the bed and the mirror, and then the desk in the back there is a chair and a desk made from coppice wood, which we've harvested from our own woodlands. Also, so to kind of give context of the kinds of things we make, we do a lot of bespoke work, particularly if we're milling the client's own trees, etc. But we also have ranges of our own products, and these are often made with, you know, coppice material like the cabinet in the background. They're always made with British wood, and in this case we're working with leather from cattle from a kind of rewilding project in Cumbria. So this is kind of regenerative leather. We're sort of trying to challenge the idea that, you know, all beef product, all animal product is bad, because actually those can fit into really balanced ecosystems. How am I doing for time? All right, cool. But the backbone of everything we do is it's from British wood, and like I say, the woodland is very much a lens through which we look at that. This is the coppice wood, which is how I sort of started out. Coppice wood is wood that's harvested on an effectively endlessly renewable cycle. So you typically would harvest that on kind of up to 12 or 15 years. And when you harvest the trees, they regrow without replanting. So it's kind of the ultimate regenerative crop. And in fact, like a hazel tree, which is what the chair's made out of there, typical lifespan of a hazel tree might be 60 years. If you coppice them, there are examples of hazels that are still alive, and they're several thousand years old in the Somerset levels. So if you keep harvesting the material above ground, the root system keeps throwing up new shoots. And what that also does is kind of create incredibly biodiverse woodlands, because something that we try to challenge in our work is the idea that woodlands should just be places of stasis and these sort of preserved habitats. But actually, if you went back a few thousand years and went through a woodland, you'd probably see a herd of mammoths trampling the trees. You'd see auroch pushing them over. Beavers would be felling trees everywhere. So if you manage woodland correctly in these sustainable ways, you're actually mimicking the behaviors of these ancient and extinct creatures. And in doing so, you're creating habitats which woodlands have evolved to give us. So things like brambles growing up through a woodland is perfectly natural. So when we coppice and we open the canopy, the vegetative succession of the new plant growth that comes through, like wildflowers and other things which need the light, which is otherwise deprived from the canopy being closed, come up, and that creates new habitats for the insects and birds. So coppicing is a really amazing way of creating biodiversity, and in the UK, it's largely done for conservation reasons rather than to give us timber. So when I was doing my MA, I sort of spotted this flaw in the fact that we import 90% of the wood that we use in the UK, and yet we have woodland that needs managing throughout the country, and tried to connect the two using furniture and products, and these are the kinds of collections that I came up with. So we do a lot of residential work. This is a kitchen in East London, in Dalston, and this is the kind of example of where we kind of use our sort of knowledge of materials to try and like crowbar in what we're trying to achieve with what the client wants to achieve. So for example, the client approached us and wanted a walnut kitchen. English walnut, I don't know if you've ever seen a really big English walnut tree or a forest of English walnuts. It doesn't really exist. They're small, occasional hedgerow or ornamental trees. So the cabinet, I'm trying to use the pointer. Yeah, look at that. The cabinet has these kind of short boards that are quite narrow, and we've accentuated them by sticking them within an ash frame. And ash is extremely abundant and widely available. And then on the like main carcasses and things like that, that's made from ash. So we've really used kind of we've elevated the more expensive, more rare species rather than making the whole thing out of it. And that kind of is one of the points of differences for us as a studio, because I think a lot of studios maybe would just think, oh yeah, sure, they want walnut, we'll do walnut, we'll find it. But we try to challenge that and work in more sustainable ways. We undertake kind of quite big projects like this commission from the Crafts Council to completely refurbish their home of craft. We work with AOC architects, and we made these kind of really like quite affordable tables, really functional, usable plank tables, and then all of the bookshelves. And again, we're working with the materials that forests are giving us. At the moment, you'll have heard of ash dieback. A lot of the ash in here is ash is being felled like you wouldn't believe at the moment throughout the country because of various insurance reasons. People are having to fell the trees, and we're able to find uses for that by using the kind of the discolored ash, so the sort of like the brown streaks and the black streaks and these kind of what would be typically perceived as imperfections. We're using them in these kinds of projects and kind of elevating that kind of wood. And then the back, the like dark color around the bookshelves is also sweet chestnut, which is a really available and highly sustainable wood in the UK that's vastly underused, and we've turned it black by painting it with rusty nails and vinegar, and it ebonizes it in that really beautiful dark color. We kind of also, one of the things that I love about what we do is that our lens through which we look at the world is, do you want us to make it out of British wood? If the answer to that is yes, we'll make it. So we get pulled in all sorts of different directions, and this winter we finished our first tree house, which was really fun. I never really set out to design a tree house, but when the client comes to you with that brief, we'll try and fulfill it. And this uses coppice wood and scorched larch, sits in this massive Atlas cedar tree. And then we also kind of make sculptures from time to time for galleries. This is a piece I made for Sarah Myerscough, where we started to look at food production and land use, and actually started to uncover lots of interesting ideas there around how we really need to change our food system and crops. And I probably don't have time to go into that, but I'll just leave it there and say we also do sculpture.
Great. Thank you very much, Seb.
Oh yeah, that's me and my wife who also runs the business. I really should mention her. She's pretty important.
Great, thank you. Before we go on to Bethan, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. You talked about the kind of primacy of the material in your work. Could you talk a little bit about the process you go by? Like, how do you go from a piece of wood, or even the tree planted in the ground, to the product? Are you, like, how much are you thinking, I want to build a chair, and then what would be the best piece of wood for this chair? Or how much are you looking at the tree and thinking, what can I make with this tree?
Yeah, very much the latter. Like our Products of Silviculture collection, which was the desk and the chair, that collection is entirely made out of whatever we harvest from the wood that winter. So if it's a mixture of like hornbeam and birch, then that's what the collection will be that year. So it's like a vintage of wine, I guess, it's what it gives you. And or if the following year it's field maple and hazel or something, we'll make it with that. So very much led by the material. And like our biggest challenge, particularly with this bespoke work, is like taking the client on that journey too. That's where communication becomes really important for us as a brand, like really telling our story, explaining and educating sort of at the basis of kind of how we make. So yeah, very much the other way around. And I suppose craft also leads into that. I think one of the things that really enabled me to sort of develop the business that I have is the fact that I spent a lot of time at the workbench exploring these materials. And like the basic starting point with that is actually, as most furniture makers are never taught how to work with wood that's wet. So if it's green, i.e. it hasn't been dried by someone else, you put that in a normal workshop, it would be a massive problem. So I looked at green woodworking, which is the traditional ways that we used to work with wood, because we didn't have massive kilns and industrial processes to dry it. So even just incorporating green wood into your woodworking workshop brings out this kind of deeper connection with the material. It exposes different possibilities. So we've become really known for weaving with wood, which is only really possible when it's supple and green. So it's totally informed by the material and then the traditional crafts that sit with that material. And
when you're kind of limited by what is available, how does that kind of changed the way you work? Because I guess you don't have the luxury of choosing wood of particular qualities or like avoiding knots or things like that. How do you kind of work with the kind of the natural quality of the wood you've got and turn it into something that's kind of beautiful at the end?
That's all about how well you can sell it to your customers. We operate kind of, that's about also how do you pick at which scale you want to operate as a business. So do you want to just be a global commodity kind of furniture maker where you're just buying in from wherever? No thanks. Do you want to be like a maker who just has an axe in a woodland and just works with what's there? Not really. So we operate at a kind of national scale. So generally, if someone wants elm, we can usually find it. But then once we've found that elm, they may have to accept the imperfections in that. But if they've already bought into the reason that we make stuff, then that's not a barrier to progress, because actually if they're on board with the message and they understand the deeper meaning behind the piece, any imperfections become a bonus to them and a story that they can tell and something which they can connect with and kind of begin to understand the world a bit better through.
And you talked about education, and I guess a lot of your work is about kind of trying to find a balance, or like kind of proving the business case, I suppose, for a kind of sustainable business that can work with nature, that can still create beautiful objects that people have, but kind of without destroying the planet. Unfortunately, a lot of the design industry is responsible in one way or the other for the kind of climate crisis we're in at the moment. And you mentioned, I think, 90% of wood is imported, and you're looking for British wood. Is that message getting through? Do you feel like other people following in your footsteps? Are you finding other businesses asking you, how do we do this? How do we get involved in the kind of way that you're working?
I'm certainly seeing it a lot with kind of graduates and the younger generation of designers who are really motivated by those kinds of things. I would say that anyone who sort of question what they eat and become a vegan, is an ally of ours in that sense, that it's about thinking, where do things come from? What are the processes that come through there? There are brands too, and I think that we've had a lot of opportunities recently from brands and customers where they've actually bought into the message even more so than the furniture. So yeah, I think it definitely has been something which has sort of put us out in front in terms of that messaging around sustainability, and because we really mean it and we're living it and we're doing it, and we're also unashamedly trying to make a living from it and profit. We're not trying to do it as some sort of NGO or charity. We are trying to say that businesses can do good if you just really think about where the stuff that you use comes from.
Great, thank you very much. All right, over to you, Bethan. You want to? All right. This is actually my timer for the whole talk, but I'm going to. You're testing my maths. You're testing my maths now. I can.
That's okay.
No, that's all right. I've restarted now.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. I'm not sure the order that my images are going to come up either, so this is going to be fun. So I'm just kind of going to explain what's there and then see how we go. So this is actually one of my latest pieces that I've just launched about a week and a bit ago in Milan. As I said before, I'm a mixed discipline designer, so I tend to make everything and anything, but it often is connected to pattern. And also, I'm interested in materials that are connected to their industrialization, and I play and question the notions around our value towards materials when they're part of larger production systems, or when we see them in a technique that's more seen as a high-end technique or a luxury technique. And I kind of play and subvert them back and forth. So this piece is called Ornate, and it is from a larger show that I just did, also called Ornate. And for this, I was interested in looking at the idea of, instead of pattern and ornamentation often being seen as something that you add on at the end, or there's one vision of design where pure design is when you strip something completely of all ornamentation to get pure design. And for me, I've always been interested in things not always being that clean cut. And so with this project, I specifically was interested in, if I designed a system up from the ornamentation, that all the construction, all of the detailing, and all the patternation created the form rather than the other way around. So this is a series of CNC milled aluminium wiggles that interlock to create different patterns that can form structure. So here I made a bed head and wall lamps as the first kind of pieces to play with this principle of reimagining or ornamentation as the starting point. And see if I remember which clicker I go. Bingo. And here's another piece that also is from the show I've just launched, and this is called Meze. And this is from a series of cabinets that also are in the Ornate show that started actually as an exploration, again, about the idea of starting with a small detail and going up. So I've always loved and collected costume jewelry, and as a female designer and looking at sometimes, I know when I exhibited my collection of plastic, which had a lot of costume jewelry in it as part of a group show at the Serpentine, I often got kind of questioned its value in relation to maybe another designer who might be male, who had like a collection of wooden spoons, and why plastic jewelry was less valuable as a collection than wooden spoons. And so for me, these kind of ephemeral objects have always been something that, especially in women's history, for a long time were one of the small ways that we could show any political leaning, show identity, show ownership of something, even in the smallest kind of way. And so again, I decided to go from that small detail and go up. So it started with the handles, and then, so which you can, it's probably, can I work out how to do the clicker thing? Hey, there we go. So it started with working with a collection of handles, and then I managed in the small gap between kind of COVID-enforced hibernation to go and visit an amazing laminate factory called Alpi, and I fell in love with these veneers that you don't normally see. They're part of the middle of a process of producing one of their industrial sheets. And I asked if they would be okay with me working with these sheets rather than a finished board, because in production and in industrialization, to make it work, you have to get some sort of standardization. But quite often in the production of creating a standard, you also hit these points of beautiful craziness. But because they can't be repeated, they can't be kind of harnessed into the system of larger production, they have to be kind of returned back in, or you have to go past them. And because a lot of my work takes things from industry but replaces them in contexts where they can be one-off, it seemed like the perfect way for me to be able to play with these sheets and allow them to be seen in a context that could work for the way that they are, which is all one-offs. So I decided to make these cabinets that were kind of draped in these veneers, and I called it Meze because it reminded me, or my obsession of understanding how they were produced, reminded me of when I first learned about Meze kimonos, which is a particular type of ikat kimono that's this mix between hand dyeing and screen printing, and it was very popular because it kind of integrated this craziness that you get between mass production being able to kind of liberate and customize and change lots of things, and then also being part of bigger systems, which means that it can only happen as part of larger volumes and then disappears, and I get kind of obsessed by those kind of things. So anyway, those are the two of my newest pieces. And another one of my newest pieces, I think we're going to go backwards in time. And this is another from the ornamentation show. And this is from a Peritivo collection of mirrors. So another part of my practice is quite often working with artisans or companies that have particular skills or a particular way of working. And I did a residency when I first graduated from my master's in Venice, and I went and visited this company, and at the time it's like a family-owned Venetian mirror company, and at the time the young men or almost young boys at the time were kind of the generation just kind of starting to take over the company, and we're still very gung-ho and like pouring the silver and smoking, and then I go back and started working with them almost like 10 years later, and they're now all like, you know, amazingly skilled, harnessing this knowledge of their family's company, and all got kids and responsible adults. And it's just so lovely when you get to meet and also work and celebrate the craft of companies and people like that that have kind of devoted their lives to understanding a technique. So Venetian mirrors, if you kind of can imagine the most kind of baroque, swirly whirly thing possible, that's probably a Venetian mirror. So I wanted to try and think of a way to make a contemporary collection, but that wasn't like ashamed of its baroqueness or its swirls or its curls. So I decided to work with them to make these slices of fruits and vegetables, because for me the kind of cream and icing and these kind of things reminded me so much of the small gems. So this one in the picture is actually one of the ones that's, if I can do a popper, if I can do a clicker, maybe. Bit difficult to see, but all like the small pins and all the ways that the glass is held together are these tiny little glass pins that look like little fruit jellies. And I just, again, took the small details from what they do and tried to kind of celebrate it, but then take it into a new language between me and them. And let's see, maybe we have one more. Oh, that's a good one to finish on, because this is also one of my most recent versions of this, but this is from a body of work that I again started at my on my master's, which started with doing marquetry with laminate. So again, a material that most of us probably know from your nan's kitchen counter, the KFC, the bank, and Memphis. And I got obsessed by this material that kind of quite often, I mean, now it's had another renaissance, so it went back up again in its kind of levels of credentials, but I kind of love the rise and fall that materials have in their history. And so I decided to find a way of working with a material like laminate that kind of celebrated its diversity. And so I intercut all different laminates from different periods of time together to create new marquetry surfaces and to kind of elevate a material that's often seen as the lowest version of a kind of high-end marble, and treat it as if it was a rare and expensive beast, which actually it then kind of subsequently becomes, because these patterns and these surfaces and these detailings can only be made or be made profitable through large production systems. So it's like some of these laminates that I started working with 10, 12 years ago were the ones in production at the time, so you could buy them by the sheet. And now they're no longer in production, so I have to kind of hunt around different kind of laminate stores to try and find like probably the most unsellable green marble that nobody bought, but I desperately need to have as a sheet to cut into a piece. So yeah, that's an ongoing way that I explore kind of detail and reanalyzing the kind of built up systems of production that we're in, and how to reassess or rework and relearn to appreciate the materials and the things that we are surrounded by, especially within the context of a city. So I think, yes, that's kind of on time.
Very well timed. Great, thank you very much, Bethan. The first couple of projects, the most recent of your projects, you talked about going from like the detail to the kind of detail up, small up. And I suppose, although your work is very different from Seb in a similar way, it's kind of inverting maybe the usual design process in some way, where you kind of take the thing you want to design and then kind of hone in on the details later. Can you talk a little bit about that process? How did you go from the detail, and how did you find it as a designer? Was it hard? Was it easy? Was it fun? Was it, what was that process like?
I think it's because it's maybe the way that I've felt comfortable to be able to approach bigger things, is to go in from a small point and go out. I think by my nature, I've always been more comfortable obsessing over those small things. And then I think also sometimes when you're part of big systems, it can kind of become very daunting to think, how can I affect this? But actually, everything is built up from one small element, and then it kind of builds and builds and builds. So I think, yeah, there's lots of other ways to work, but it's always been the way that I've found comfort in working, and then I like the connection it has to kind of disrupting larger things, but from kind of bubbling up in a kind of slow way, but hopefully effective.
Yeah, and you also talked a bit about kind of how decoration, I suppose, is, or like detail is perceived, and you talked about like maybe like setting aside other designers who are maybe more kind of serious. Do you think that like decoration, kind of intricate detail, that was somehow kind of people looked down on it kind of in the past, maybe because of the influence of modernism, and that now people are kind of really starting to appreciate that stuff a lot more?
I think, sorry, I'm just going to cough in a non-COVID-y manner, I assure you. I think, like every movement, every trend, that goes through waves where a love for ornamentation and decoration has a window, and it's almost like, you know, when you see it everywhere, then reset with something completely alternatively different and go to something more minimum. It's our nature to kind of, once we kind of feel something's everywhere, to then kind of covet the thing that's something else. So I think it's quite a healthy kind of back forth that we go through.
Great. All right, you can grab yourself a drink, and Justin, we'll move over to you.
Sure. Hello. Yeah, as I said before, photographer from Ithaca, New York, as well as a bartender. For most of the years of the photography I've been doing stuff like weddings, which I shoot with my younger sister, who's a much more talented wedding photographer than I am. Live music, I worked for the local newspaper in Ithaca for a few years, that kind of stuff. But for the past couple years, most of the work I've been doing has focused on photography through the microscope. On the screen now, I think actually if I click this, it's going to be the same image. Yep. Is the main image that number 3 Jen is using for the project, which I worked for on them. And here is specifically the frozen gin itself with its water content, its alcohol content, and all the botanicals in it as well, each lending to the final form that we see here. And in just a minute, I'll get to exactly how this was done. The theme here was to talk about our ideas of perfection in our work. And in my microscopy, that means getting the best, most pure materials, setting them up for success, and then doing my best to get out of their way so that they can show off. The getting out of their way bit turns out to be a little bit harder than it may sound, and involves creating the exact conditions, the exact environmental conditions and environment that they need. There was a tree that didn't lend itself to the composition. I'm not going to photograph that landscape and then Photoshop the tree out of it. My approach to this kind of art is very let nature speak for itself, because nature speaks for itself really quite perfectly, I think. And I do think that the average person would be pretty amazed by the type of beauty that's present in really seemingly plain or mundane substances, if you just have the technology and the know-how to look at them in the right way. When number 3 reached out to me to see if I could do this for them, I was super excited to tackle the project because it really seemed like number 3's philosophy of simplicity and purity lined up really well with my philosophy behind the type of work that I try to do. This did turn out to end up giving me some pretty big technical challenges. And in a minute, I'll get into exactly how I kind of tackled those challenges and how my general process works. So that there on the left is me starting my career. And on the right is me with my more proper microscope setup. The point is that I've been super interested in science and photography ever since I was very young. I had a lot of cool influences in my family, a lot of photographers in the family. And since I was very, very young, there's been nothing more fascinating to me than everything there is to learn about the way the universe works. So, cute, cheesy picture of me as a, I don't know, 6-year-old perhaps. I'm cheating today, by the way. But yeah, I've just been super, super lucky to find a niche in art that allows me to blend my passions for photography and science so perfectly. And I'll say I'm definitely more of an artist than a scientist. I don't have a PhD, and I'm not doing this for research purposes, but science absolutely informs pretty much everything I do, and I'm more than excited to learn new things about the science behind the work I do as I do it. That's actually a big inspiration for me to try to work with new substances or try new techniques, is because I really want to learn what's possible to do and just how the world works. So the type of microscopy that I've been working with mainly, and the type I did for number 3, is what's known as polarized light microscopy. So here we have an image of 2 separate amino acids blended together, L-glutamine and beta-alanine, both of which you all have in abundance in your bodies right now. And it's important to note that these are 2 separate pure powders combined, and as you can see, it's not just singular elements or molecules that are able to create beautiful forms. It's often the synergy between multiple components that creates kind of the most elegant result. I think that's also the case for number 3's gin and the cocktails that I photographed for them as well. Here's a couple more examples of the work I've been doing over the past couple years. These are some different amino acids blended together. Each of these images is super, super large. I couldn't get the full resolutions in a PowerPoint, but they're stitched panoramas of maybe 20 or 30 images tall by, however many wide through a digital SLR. So these things could probably be printed the size of a large building at 300 dots per inch or something like that. So basically here we can see the type of complex and organic artful forms that just simple molecules will create when we give them the ideal environment in which to work their own magic. One of the first questions that someone would be likely to ask seeing these is, where do these colors come from? Are they digital additions? And the answer is absolutely not. In line with my working philosophy of non-interference and honest representation in my work, these colors are the result of what's called birefringence. So it's the interaction of polarized light with the structures of the crystals and the modification of that polarized light by the structure of the crystal as the light passes through it. So if you were to look through the microscope at these things, this is exactly what you would see with your eyes, with no digital manipulation whatsoever. I won't go too deeply into the science behind that, but if you're a research scientist, this type of polarized light microscopy actually tells you a lot of really useful information about the structures of the crystals themselves or the materials that you're looking at. For me, it just looks really beautiful. So now on to how I've been doing this type of thing. The 3 main methods I've been using to get these results out of materials are melting. So some materials have a melting point that I can achieve in my home, and they melt nicely, and as they cool, they recrystallize into their lowest energy state and form into all manner of different shapes. Evaporation from solution is another method I use a lot. So some things are soluble in things that I have at home, such as high-proof alcohol, water, acetone, etc. So I can mix up some powders or crystals or whatever it is I might have, spread a little bit out onto a glass slide, and then either let it evaporate in the air in a closed box so that cat hair doesn't get on it, or on a hot plate or something like that. And you can get really amazing results really quickly sometimes. The third method I've used to create images like this, and the one that I created for number 3 is the only way I could accomplish the number 3 images, is actually freezing. So this involved a lot of work to figure out. Oop, sorry, that's just one more image. This is pure elemental sulfur crystallized with its real colors there. On to what I did for number 3. So if I can use this little spotlight button. These here are what are known as Peltier devices. So they're thermoelectric devices stacked on top of each other. I have a couple different power supplies here because they each need to be run at different voltages. I have a glycol-filled ice bath in the back here running to a cooling block to get this extra cold. I'm not sure the exact temperatures I ended up achieving, but as you can see, I got to -47°C, and then my thermometer decided the temperature was just low because I can't measure that low. So this is necessary because when freezing alcoholic spirits, of course, alcohol doesn't really want to freeze very easily. You need to have extremely cold temperatures to achieve this. And although you see this set up in my bedroom in this photo, the actual work I was doing was done outside in the middle of Ithaca winter at something like -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Because if I didn't do it that way, within a quarter of a second, the crystals would melt away and I wouldn't have the time to photograph them. So this is just one example of the sort of steps that need to be taken to allow what naturally exists in these materials to display their elegance as best that they can. The world is a super messy place, but the more variables that I'm able to remove from the situation, the more the underlying maths and chemistry which govern and operate our universe can impress us. My idea here is that nature is perfect as it is, but to show that perfection in a way that's apparent to us humans can be a bit of a task. The same rules which govern the arrangement of these molecules into beautiful crystals are the same rules that govern the arrangement of the galaxies in our universe, the evolution of the neurons in your brain, the growth of the botanicals and the gin that you're going to be drinking later, if you're of age, and all the basic fundamental forces of nature applied to physical properties and materials over time. And that's what I've been trying to show off to people in my work, and that's what I hope to continue to do.
Great. Thank you, Justin. I love how those amazing, beautiful images are produced by a kind of tangle of cables and random Tupperware and things. It's a nice juxtaposition.
It's a bit of a mess, and to my flatmates at the time, I think it looked like I was doing some pretty sketchy stuff up in my bedroom. But yeah, it worked out well. And just to finish off, this is a Negroni made with No. 3 gin crystallized as a final image.
I could do one of those right now.
Yeah,
and maybe we haven't got too much time left, so maybe we can have one sooner rather than later. What magnification is this that we're looking at here?
Most of these images were about 40 times magnification. So left to right on this image, because again, it is a stitched panorama, is probably 2 millimeters or so you're looking at. Yeah.
Well, so Bethan, you thought you started small, but this is... Great, we're almost out of time, so we haven't got too much to chat, but I wondered, Justin kind of talked about the idea of perfection, and I guess for you to find perfection, you go super small. Again, do you have any idea of like how you're going to find that? Do you have a sense of this particular compound would give a great result, or is it kind of stick the microscope on it and kind of see what you get?
So that's actually a lot of the fun in what I've been doing. The answer is no, I don't know what to expect. It's a field that if you do find images like this on the internet, 99% of them are done by research scientists who aren't doing it for aesthetic purposes. And there's very little information on what kind of crystal structures certain materials can make. And of course, it's not only crystal structures I photograph as well. I take thin sections of plants, all kinds of materials. So most of the exciting stuff for me is just collecting new materials as I'm able to and seeing what they might or might not do. And certainly not everything ends up being beautiful under the microscope. I had someone reach out to me recently to see if it was possible to do a project for their dairy farm. And they're really proud of their manure that they grow the grass that the cows eat with. And they sent me a sample of their special cow manure. And it turns out that under the microscope, cow manure just looks like cow manure, but a lot bigger. So yeah, you have to get lucky. And I was very lucky that the spirits from No. 3 ended up being as beautiful as they were.
A good client. Seb, what about for you? What does kind of perfection mean for you? You talked a little bit about kind of working with imperfection. Is perfection something you strive for? What does that kind of word mean for you as a designer and in your work?
I actually think perfection, for me, usually rings alarm bells a little bit. You know, those clients who sort of, you know, so in the age of craft that we're in, perfection is actually, there's a misconception that craft is about perfection, I think. Craft is about the human, and these days we can make more precisely with machines. So if we're talking about, you know, having this sort of imbued value of the human in the piece, it will inevitably contain imperfection. And we do have those occasional clients who are saying, well, I'm paying a lot of money for this. Like, this should be absolutely flat, or it shouldn't move, you know, and it's like, well, it's solid wood, so it's going to move, you know, and there's just those sorts of conversations. So it can cause problems. And I think that, you know, it's really interesting there's that kind of idea around perfection with aesthetics as well, which I think, you know, just, you know, I do like talking about design as well, but I'm really interested in biodiversity. And I think that one of the problems with, particularly in the UK, is like we apply this degree of aesthetic perfection to our landscapes. So, you know, we mow all of our verges and we, you know, cut hedges back, and, you know, there's all those sorts of things which actually create issues. So I would like to unpick this idea of aesthetic perfection being a significant priority, and just, I'd like to let things go wild a little bit personally, whether that's in furniture and objects or, you know, our gardens, the earth, motorway verges, etc.
Well, I guess if anything that Justin's images show on the kind of microscopic kind of level is that nature is beautiful, right? It's like it's kind of pure. It's kind of aesthetically wondrous. So yeah, I guess maybe we need to kind of rethink our kind of notions of beauty in terms of the kind of the places we live in, the objects we have, and the kind of world we see around us, I suppose.
Yeah, completely. And I think that, you know, you could walk around the galleries here and find, you know, examples of paintings of the like quintessential English landscape, which are actually like perfected versions of what it actually should and could and did look like. You know, if you think about a Capability Brown landscape, that sort of chocolate box image of England, that's actually a completely manipulated version of what nature is, but perhaps that's fed into what we think nature needs to look like now. So I think there's a big question to be had around how much we value aesthetics and potentially how much problem they cause us as well.
And Bethan, what about for you? Your work is kind of, in the kind of traditional sense, aesthetic. It's bright, it's colourful. What does kind of perfection mean for you? Is it something that you strive for?
I mean, I agree with quite a lot of what's been said by my other two fellow detail people, that it's finding the perfection in imperfections, or turning things on their head and finding a beauty that you find and that resonates with you. I think is that's what I try and strive for within the work that I create, is that I make that connection between my obsession, but also I hope that obsession will feed into something that somebody else will want to be obsessed by and keep and treasure and understand more where it comes from, or a material, or how. For me, I'm always interested a bit in where the industrialization and nature have a conversation or reopen us to maybe understand or unpack more very industrialized things, because it's kind of it is important for us to kind of understand where things come from, to know better how to work with them or use them, or the impact of X, Y, and Z things when they're part of bigger things, by understanding the small details of what make them. So yeah, I think that maybe answers the question.
Yeah, close enough. Great, we are out of time. It seems like the kind of conclusion to draw from this is that you can find beauty in lots of places except cow dung, which is always just going to be cow dung. Great, thank you so much to Seb, Bethan, and Justin. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks everyone for watching at home, and let's get a Negroni, I think.